friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's Everyday Monkeys and the Wild Roar. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. And I'm going to start with my monkeys, and for their fur I'm going to use E55, E57, and E59. I prefer to color darkest to lightest, so I'm going to begin with the E59, laying in my shadows, and even though I'm coloring all of these monkeys the same, I'm just going to work on one at a time so I can make sure to really blend out that E59 because it is such a dark color and I want to make sure that I don't leave behind any harsh lines. So I'll come in with the E57 next and start to go over the edge of that and kind of pull it into the mid-tone. And then I will fill in with the E55 right around the face and on the front of the legs and the edges of the ears for this first little monkey, and at the top of the tail as well. That would also be highlighted since it's up toward the light source, which would be the sun above. And then I am going to move on to the little baby. So I'll go back to that E59, and I'm going to be very sparing with this on the baby, especially because I don't want the baby to look too dark. The smaller the image, the more likely it is to get lost with those darker colors. So just a tiny touch of the shadowed areas, and then I'll come in with that E57 and start to blend it out, leaving more room on the front little hands, and also right around the face, on the forehead and the side of the ears for that E55, so it has a nice highlight but still looks like part of a family. Then I'm going to move on to the monkey that is holding the banana up to his ear like a little telephone, or maybe he's just cuddling with it close to his face because he really loves bananas. I don't know. But I'm going to color this monkey and the one above exactly the same as I did the other two. And my E57 got a little bit leaky, so I just pulled off the other cap to equalize the pressure in the barrel so that I wouldn't get any like ink splooshes and ruin my coloring. And so I'll just continue on. So if you missed part 1 of this video, it was my September plan a card with me. So once a month I do that style of video, and it's basically a behind the scenes look at a normal video. So it's what goes on before I typically turn the camera on and start making a card. So it's the entire process from choosing which stamp sets to use and figuring out which images I want, what layout I'm going to do, what size card I'm going to make, what other supplies I might use like the dies or the color palette, if I'm going to use any pattern paper, and all of that stuff is what I figure out with you guys in those plan a card with me videos. So if that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, you can check that out on my channel. So I have an entire playlist where the first video is the planning process, and then the second video is actually creating the card, so that way you can see the entire process, not just coming up with the idea, but also seeing it come to fruition. Moving on to the monkey's skin, I'm going to continue using the E50s, but I'm just going to go lighter using E50, E51, and E53. So I'm going to do their faces with this. I'll do the insides of their ears and any of the bellies that are showing. So I'm starting with the E53 and laying in a bit of shadow around the outer edges of the face, a little bit in the inner ear and on the belly, and then I'll blend that out with the E51, just feathering that down on the face so that way I can keep the lower part of the face nice and light, and also blending out the inner ear and belly. And then for the highlight, I'm going to bring in the E50. And using the E50s, I think just really helps the monkeys look a bit more cohesive because they're all in the same color family, just a little bit darker for the fur and then lighter for the skin. Then I'm going to move up to my little birds, and I decided to make them gray parrots because this stamp set reminds me of the year that my husband and I lived in Africa. We lived in Cameroon, West Africa, with our newborn baby. He was 3 months old, our oldest, when we went there. And he was over a year, and I was already halfway through my pregnancy with my second son when we came back. But while we were there, we were watching another family's pet parrot, who was a gray parrot named Jimmy. So I decided to honor Jimmy with these little birds here. Although I did switch it up and give them a little red crown on top of their heads instead of a red tail, because the way these images are drawn, you can't really see the tail. So I used R24 and R29 for that, and now I'm using R11 and R20 to give the monkeys and the parrots some rosy cheeks. And then I also added a touch of pink to the parrots' bellies with the R11. Then I'm going to switch brown tones to the E30s because I want to do my banana tree, and I wanted it to match the monkeys, but I didn't want it to be the same tones as them because I want it to stand out and look separate. So I pulled out E30, E31, E33, E35, and E37, and I am going to do almost like an ombre effect. So on the bottom layer of the tree, I started with E37, blended out with E35, and then E33, and I did do a second layer of that. I'm also doing some of the little tops of the bananas. And then on the second layer, I'm starting with the E35, blending out with the E33, and then using the E31. On the third layer, I'm starting with the E33, blending out with the E31, and then the E30. And then I also added a touch of the E30 into the top section, and I'll blend out the rest of my banana stems. And then I wanted to add a bit of green into the brown because banana trees kind of have brown at the bottom, but then they get green toward the top. So I'm adding some G20 to each of those sections and just feathering that into the brown so that it kind of transitions between the two shades. Then I'll bring in YG11 and YG17, and I'm going to use these for the little part that's holding the bananas together, and then also throwing a little bit of the YG11 into each part of the tree. And I threw a little bit of it into my bananas so that they would have a touch of green, so some of them would maybe not look quite ripe. Then I'll move up to my banana leaves, and I am going to start with the YG17 for those, adding some darkness to the base of each leaf and also down the center line. And then I will blend that out with the YG11. Normally I would transition to the YG13, but my YG13 is completely dry right now, so I am skipping over a marker. So I do have to work a little bit harder to blend that YG11 and the YG17 together and try not to leave behind harsh lines from that YG17. So I'm just making sure to really scrub over the edge of that. And then down at the bottom and tip of each of those leaves, I'll add the G20. And I did do a second layer on all of those leaves as well, just to smooth out that blend even further. I'll also do some of the leaves down below. I'm going to do the one with like the chubbier leaves with the YG17 and the YG11. Just blending those out. It's the same exact image, I just stamped it twice, and the same with the skinnier ones, which we'll get to in just a minute. I'm going to switch greens to a darker combo using G21, G24, and G28. I'll do the grass below the banana tree. First, I'll kind of outline the grassy area with that G28, and then I'll start to blend that out with the G24, and I'll leave a little area in the center to use the G21 on. And then I'm just going to use the G28 for the skinnier leaves because they're so thin that it's really impossible to blend on them. So just that one darkest shade. And then I'll use all three shades for these larger kind of monstera type leaves. And again, just like I did with the banana leaves, I'm placing that darkest color down the center line and then blending it out just a little bit toward the sides. And then I'll come in with my mid-tone, the G24, and bring that out even further. Just being careful to color around the little holes in the leaf. And then I'll use the G21 to take that toward the very edges and fill in any remaining white space. And then I will color the other leaf exactly the same. And that is a separate leaf. They are just turning in a little bit of a different direction. So I wanted to have both of those for balance on my card. And those are all from the Wild Roar, the leaves, both these that I'm coloring now and the leaves down at the bottom, plus the little parrots. Well, I guess they don't have to be parrots. I think you could color them to be any bird you wanted. I just decided to make them the African greys for today. But I think they're so sweet. And I'm still not sure if that little thing on their head is actually supposed to be there or if that is the other wing on the opposite side of the body. I think it could be whatever you want it to be, but I just decided to have a little extra decoration and pop of color there. For my bananas, I've moved to Y11 with Y21 and Y26. I wanted more of a golden yellow banana to match some pattern paper that I'll be using. So I'm starting with the Y26 down at the base of the bananas, and then I blended that out with the Y21. And then to warm up that combo a little bit, I brought in Y11. And I think that combo ended up looking really nice. I am going to lighten it a bit to do the insides of the peel that are bent down on two of those bananas. So I'm using the Y000 for that with the Y11. And then for the actual banana that's showing, I am only using the Y000 and left the rest of it white. I did also use the Y21 and the Y11 for the parrot's beaks, and then I took a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side and went over the eyes of all of my parrots and monkeys to make them nice and bright and shiny again. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I trimmed down a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock with one of the Mama Elephant BRB arches. And then I've got an acrylic block and a little vessel of water off to the side. And I'm going to do some watercoloring to create a simple background. I'm starting with the sky, and for that I'm using Speckled Egg. I wanted this shade because it's just like a barely there blue. It's got a little bit of gray tone in it as well, which is going to match with the pattern paper that I'll be using. So I'm just painting on a sky and keeping it very organic so that there's some little areas that are a bit darker and some that are lighter. Then I'll bring in my next shade, which is Bundled Sage, and that's going to help me transition from the sky to the grass. So I'll just blend that on so that it meets up with that speckled egg and even seeps a little bit into that area so that they kind of mix and meld together. And then I'll bring in a third shade, which is going to be Gathered Twigs. And I only want a little bit of pigment with this one. It's quite brown, and I wanted to have some dirt down below, but I don't want it to be too dark. So I'm adding a lot of water to this one and just making sure to mix that into the bundled sage as well so that it gets a little bit softer where the two meet up. And then I'll just make sure I have my edges how I want them. I wanted to leave a little bit of a white outline around the edges, which kind of matches with the die cut images. So I'm just fixing that up, and then I will set this piece aside to dry. Once it's dried completely, I'm going to pop that into my MISTI and make sure that that is pressed down firmly so it makes contact with my waffle flower grip mat so that I can stamp my sentiment. And I did change this up a little bit from the original idea in the Plan a Card With Me video. I decided to split up the sentiment and use the first part of it, the It's Your Day, on the front of the panel, and then save the second part for the inside of the card. So I'm adding a piece of Lawn Fawn's sticky note cardstock to my MISTI, and I'll stamp on the inside in walnut ink. And then I chose the image with the monkey and the large banana and the sentiment Go Bananas. So the whole card will say, It's Your Day, Go Bananas. So the pattern paper that I had planned to use was from the Lawn Fawn Fruit Salad 6x6, and I was going to use the 2 sheets that I'm showing there on screen. But then I actually realized that I had a larger piece that is cut down from the 12x12. Lawn Fawn often sends these to you with your order. So I got this in my latest one, and it's the same exact paper, it's just on a larger scale. It's 50% larger, and it has the plaid pattern that I was going to use on the back side. So I just trimmed that down with my paper trimmer to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then cut off the bottom, and I'll flip that over so that I have the 2 different prints that I wanted to use on this card using the same exact sheet of paper. So I'm going to glue the banana portion to the top part, and then I'll use the plaid portion on the bottom. And I just really loved that the bananas were much larger and more prominent on this larger scale print. I thought that just tied in with our images a bit better. So I've added some foam tape to the back of the arch focal panel, and I'm going to make sure that that is centered on the card before I pop that down into place. And then I can bring in my images. So I'm going to start by laying out my main images because it is going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze to fit everything in. And I like that. I like a really full scene card, but I just want to make sure that I have everything where I want it before I start gluing it down because this glue dries so fast. So any adjustments I need to make, I want to make them now. And then once I am happy with the layout, I will start working my way from the back. So the first image is going to be the large banana tree because that is supposed to be further back in the scene, and then the monkeys are kind of gathered in front of it. So I'm going to glue that down over to the top right, and I'll have just a tiny bit of the edges of the leaves hanging off the right side of the panel, which I think just gives it a fun look. It makes the scene look really expansive. And then I'll glue down my large leaves. I'll do one on the right and one on the left. I'll have my monkey that is listening to his banana phone up toward the top of the scene right next to that banana tree. And then my mama and baby monkey will go just above the sentiment down on the lower right. And then I'll have the monkey with the banana peel on his head balancing that on the left. Then I'm going to add my other little accessory images, and I'm just figuring out the final placement for those. And sometimes these differ from my original idea in the Plan a Card with Me. Just as the card starts to come together, I can see where there might be some empty spaces and where I want to fill things in. And so I just adjust as I'm in the process of creation. So I can see there's a little bit of an empty space right in the center of that scene above that banana trio. So I'm going to fill that in with some of these leaves. I'll have one of the darker leaves and then also one of the lighter clusters, just kind of filling in that space as if there's a little plant growing there behind those bananas. And then I'll add another of these little green frondy plants behind the peeled banana. And then the other one I'm going to have kind of balancing out that banana over on the left. So I'm just making sure I have that at the angle that I want it. And then all that's left is my two little parrots. So I thought about moving the this gray parrot down a little bit and filling in that empty space, but I decided to put it a little bit higher on the scene, which is where I had originally planned to put him when I did the layout. And then the other parrot I'm going to place over on the left to fill in that empty spot. And I really liked how this was looking, but I just wanted a little bit of an extra embellishment, so I grabbed some clear sequins and I just add a little scattering of those coming from the top left corner down toward the bottom right corner. So I'm just adding those with a bit of my Barely Art Precision craft glue and using my Studio Katia embellishment wand to pick those up. And then I use the opposite end of the tool to kind of press them into the glue and position them exactly where I want them. And once I have those placed, I let them dry for about maybe a minute. And then I like to fill the centers with some Stardust stickles or any kind of stickles, but that's the one that I'm using today, so that it's not too distracting from the coloring, but it just adds a subtle extra bit of sparkle. So that is going to finish up this card. I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and catch some of the sparkle and shine, and of course give you another peek at the inside. I had a lot of fun playing with these stamp sets, and I'm really pleased with how this card turned out, so I hope that you enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will all be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.